Dan Batovici of the University of Leuven, the Catholic University Leuven, to tell us about the New Testament liturgical context of 1 and 2 Clement in Cambridge Additional Manuscript 1700. Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Indeed, thank you very much for putting all of this together. It's been a great series of seminars. Thank you also for having me, and thanks everyone for joining in. This paper is based on a fresh look at University Library Cambridge Additional Manuscript 1700 and its material context. This is a 12th century Syriac New Testament manuscript equipped with liturgical apparatus throughout the tables of readings at the beginning and tables of readings at the beginning. It is also the main Syriac witness for 1st Clement and the sole witness so far for 2nd Clement in this language. They are fully incorporated in the lectionary cycle and are placed after the Catholic Epistles and before the Pauline corpus, which of course raises questions with regard to their function in this manuscript and the reason for their inclusion. This paper will therefore focus in many ways on the question of association of texts, of clusters of texts in multiple text manuscripts. This is a topic that piqued my interest first as a grad student working with Peter Head, and although I ended up writing on fragmentary papyri for my PhD, I'm now getting back at the issue from a broader perspective. In fact, this research is part of a larger project on the reception of the so-called Apostolic Fathers in their ancient translations. Since this is an artificial corpus, a modern doing, the first part of the paper will briefly map out the various ways in which the Apostolic Fathers are partly associated, grouped in manuscripts prior to the modern emergence of the corpus in print. The second part of the paper will then discuss the reception historical relevance of the presence of 1st and 2nd Clement in Cambridge Additional 1700 against the broader context of Syriac New Testament liturgical manuscripts. So on to the Apostolic Fathers. Holding the 2 lower volumes in our hands and the volume edited by Mike Holmes, this looks like a clear-cut, settled corpus. However, the shortfall of any research project focused on all Apostolic Fathers is the fact that this is an artificial corpus of mixed writings put together only in recent times. Indeed, any study of the whole corpus is potentially undermined with regard to the definition of the research sample by the fact that it imports the various sets of presumptions and ideologies behind the early stages of the formation of the modern corpus. And indeed, there are a handful of contributions that trace the emergence of that collection and show that this makes for its own peculiar modern history. But more often than not, we proceed by simply acknowledging that this is a recent collection and by pointing to the fact that it has been nonetheless a very productive sample in recent scholarship. And for what it's worth, that almost any understanding of apocryphal literature, for instance, has the same problems, which doesn't stop us doing it. However, various individual Apostolic Fathers have been associated in their manuscript transmissions. This table offers a very provisional list. Just to describe what's going on, the green column on the left notes the languages, Greek, Latin, and Syriac, and the second column, the manuscripts in chronological order. For the sake of convenience, so that this table doesn't get too long, I have conflated in one row all witnesses in a given language that contain the same group of Apostolic Fathers. For instance, there are 17 witnesses grouping Polycarp and Ignatius in Latin, from the 9th to the 16th century, and I only noted down the earliest. Similarly, there are at least seven manuscripts that associate Polycarp, Ignatius, and Barnabas in Greek from the 12th to the 17th century. Then there are at least 4 types of witnesses that associate 3 Apostolic Fathers, and so on. What this shows is that pre-modern witnesses that group together individual Apostolic Fathers indicate that there are in fact various patterns and networks of association all throughout their transmission, from late antiquity all the way until the appearance of modern, printed volumes of the collection. As it were, in the process of modern emergence of the corpus, the patterns and their network of connections were already there. What this shows is that there are, in fact, various patterns and networks of association connecting the Apostolic Fathers through their transmission. I just had a paragraph written twice. This is not to say that the modern collection is not imbued with presuppositions and agendas, but one could imagine that a scholar looking to form a research sample, starting for instance with Polycarp, would collect both Ignatius and Barnabas based on no less than 30 witnesses where they are associated with Polycarp. And then if that scholar then proceeds by adding texts from manuscripts where 2 already selected texts are presented, they would virtually retrieve the whole corpus. In this table, there are many empty cells to be sure, but a look at the editions of the Apostolic Fathers. This is the synopsis taken from Pratchett's introduction at both ends, the earliest and the more recent editions. Shows that they are not compactly full either, especially in the early years. We are now used with more complete collections from Ehrman and Holmes editions as the standard, but even in print there is quite some hesitation with regard to the inclusion of this or that individual text. And every now and again, an individual Apostolic Fathers has been printed in some different collections. Overall, the Apostolic Fathers emerged from their manuscript transmission not as a set corpus, which is fine, the same goes for printed collections until recently, but rather as a network of writings connecting several or more or less clear patterns of associating individual Apostolic Fathers. Half of what makes the study of the ancient translations of the Apostolic Fathers interesting is therefore the question of association, both within the corpus, as we've seen so far, as well as outside the corpus, as will be the case in the remainder of the paper. And with that, I think I used up the number of times anyone says Apostolic Fathers in a given day. So this much about the broader collection. I turn now to the Cambridge manuscript. The fact that we only have one older witness to first Clement in Syriac, and second, only one extant anywhere, is somewhat remarkable, given that there is a thriving and diverse pseudo-Clementine literature transmitted in Syriac, with significantly more witnesses than one, starting as early as the 5th century. British Library additional manuscript 12,150, containing among others the Clementine recognitions, is dated, I believe, to 412. As it were, the memory of Clement is preserved in Syriac in various forms, but apparently not enough to have much of first and second Clement themselves. Indeed, we are talking about only one witness in a manuscript copied in Edessa in year 1170. And if you go by the colophon, it is actually copied by Sahda, the meanest monk in Edessa, where first and second Clement follow the Catholic Epistles and are followed by the Pauline corpus, 14 letters. The manuscript contains overall the 4 Gospels, Acts, the Catholic Epistles, 1st and 2nd Clement, and 14 letters of Paul. The manuscript is also lectionary, not in the sense that the readings are extracted according to the liturgical cycle, as in a Gospel lectionary Apostolos. Rather, it contains the complete, continuous text of the Gospel, Acts and letters, with added, actually embedded, lectionary apparatus. The manuscript has at the beginning several tables of readings, here featured on the left, which show a threefold grouping of the books in the manuscript: the Gospel and Acts, then the Catholic Epistles and 1st and 2nd Clement, then the Pauline corpus. The grouping of the Clementine letters with the Catholic Epistles is not for the tables only, as indeed 1st Clement is introduced in the title as the Catholic Epistle of Clement, the disciple of Peter the Apostle to the Church of Corinthians, which can be seen in red ink in the image on the right. Later on, 2nd Clement is then introduced as of the same author, the 2nd Epistle to the Corinthians. It's worth stressing, both letters have been fully incorporated into the lectionary cycle and are assigned by the liturgical apparatus to be read in 17 non-consecutive Sundays after the resurrection. The liturgical rubrics carry numbers which are written in the margin of the column of the text, but the rubric themselves are integrated, embedded into the text, so they are not later additions. There is really not much difference in the manner in which the text of 1st and 2nd Clement are treated compared to the other books in the manuscript. The same type of column script, with 1st Clement following Jude on the same page in the same way other books follow one another, with similar illuminations, colophons, and headings, and continuous liturgical apparatus throughout. Of course, the textual traditions are different. The New Testament books follow closely the Herclean version in the manuscript, while the text of the Clementine letters show a far greater degree of ordinance by comparison. I quoted here from Christopher Tackett in his editions of 2nd Clement. And this is a phenomenon which Lightfoot describes as an unrestrained indulgence in periphrasis and gloss. Overall, this puzzling manuscript comes to us with no context. The practice of assigning 1st and 2nd Clement readings in a set numbers of Sundays after the resurrection is not parallel in other sources, so far as I know. Yet it seems that the community had readily available and presumably used a complex liturgical manuscript with the Clementine letters embedded in their practice in the same way the New Testament books are. The question brought about by this state of affairs is then the following. What other texts appear in Syriac New Testament manuscripts, and specifically in liturgical New Testament manuscripts? Again, I'm looking not for New Testament lectionaries with excerpts taken from the Gospel arranged in the order in which they are read in service, but manuscripts that have the continuous text of the New Testament books with added liturgical apparatus that indicates what gets read when. To warm up, I start with a manuscript of the Peshitta Gospels. This is dated to 586, so to the 6th century, in Florence. It's hosted in Florence. It is a beautifully illuminated manuscript, mostly at the beginning. On the right, there are featured Ammonius and Eusebius, and this page precedes Eusebius' letters to Carpianus and the Eusebian canon tables decorated in the same manner. I haven't seen yet Matt Crawford's book on the Eusebian canons, but I imagine this manuscript makes an appearance there. In the image on the right, it is the ending of Matthew and the beginning of Mark. But the text of the Gospel is preceded not only by illustrations and canons, but also by tables of readings spread on 4 folios, the first of which is featured here in the image on the left. This makes for an added apparatus And since the tables of readings are clearly later additions, it means that what we see here is an early stage in the process of producing New Testament manuscripts with embedded liturgical apparatuses. It is a New Testament manuscript to which at some point was added another apparatus to prepare it for liturgical use. The question is, however, what other texts are copied with New Testament books? The previous one didn't have anything apart from the New Testament. An example is British Library 14,474 of the 9th century, for which I haven't got images due to lockdown. It contains the Peshitta version of the letters of Paul, Acts, and most of the Catholic Epistles, and for some reason, the Harclean version of James, 2 Peter, and 1 John. These are then followed by a series of festal homilies of Jacob of Seru on the Epiphany, on Lent, and so on, and discourses of Severus of Antioch on the Ascension and Pentecost. These additional texts are therefore related to these liturgical cycles, but of course, here only the New Testament books have the reading sections indicated in the margins. All in all, the most common text to be copied with New Testament text, especially in manuscripts specifically devised for liturgical use, are the so-called harmonies of Passion narratives. This is a compilation of gospel extracts from Passion narratives peculiar to Syriac lectionaries, which appears in Cambridge 1700 as well. A recent survey of Syriac New Testament manuscripts by David Taylor offers no less than 10 examples spanning from the 10th to the 13th centuries. More examples can be added. Here from the Chaldean Cathedral in Mardin, manuscript 29 of the 12th or 13th century, which has extensive tables of readings at the beginning, one of them featured on the left, then the 4 Gospels, then the harmony of Passion narratives. The first page of the harmony is here on the right, with the notes in the margin pointing to the source of each excerpt. In red, in the margin, I think it's Matthew, Luke, John, and Mark, and so on. Finally, 2 more examples, interesting because they involve pseudo-Clementine material copied with New Testament writings. First, another manuscript in Cambridge, 00112, contemporary with 1700, with additional 1700. This is the Buchanan Bible, containing the Gospel. The latter is a collection of texts that include, among others, the Apostolic Constitutions, that include the so-called Apostolic Canons, which is a peculiar document that lists 2 letters of Clement with the New Testament letters, while claiming itself to be written by Clement. I extracted here the relevant Greek text from Gallagher and Mead's book. Goes like, that is our new covenant, Gospels, Acts, and then the letters, and after 2 of Peter, there goes 2 of Clement. And the constitutions that are for you, the bishops, invoked by me, Clement. So it's a peculiar document. Secondly, we have a very close equivalent of Cambridge additional manuscript 1700 in 2 later manuscripts, but with a twist. The 2 Clementine letters, while placed again between the Catholic Epistles and Paul's 14 letters, despite the title saying the first, respectively second letter of Clement, the disciple of Peter, we are in fact 2 other pseudo-Clementine letters, namely the first and second letter of Clement on virginity, last edited in 1856 in Leuven. So what does this all material do for a better understanding, why First and Second Clement are featured in a New Testament Syriac manuscript? Normally, when scholars discuss the position of First Clement in relation to the New Testament, they tend to mention Cambridge 1700, but in sort of a cumulative manner, rather than suggesting that it might be in any sort of direct evidence for that. Lightfoot, however, is more committed, as he concludes his analysis of the manuscript with the claim that from the first line, it will be evident that, so far as regards the scribe himself, the Clementine epistles are put on an absolute equality with the canonical writings. Here, for the first time, they appear, not at the close of the volume, as in Codex Alexandrinus, but with the Catholic Epistles, the position which is required on the presupposition of perfect canonicity. Now, Lightfoot is obviously right that they are on the same level for the scribe, or rather for the authorities that order it, or for whomever took the trouble to integrate the Clementine letters in a liturgical calendar to begin with, or the community that presumably used it. But what exactly is that level? Well, rather than something related to virtually any current understanding of the New Testament canon, the data presented so far suggest that this level is rather a space in which a broader range of texts can be copied with New Testament writings, spanning from patristic homilies to harmonies of passion narratives. And among them, a vaguely persistent presence is that of Clementine literature, including the Clementine Octateuch, which contains the Apostolic Constitutions that include 2 letters of Clementine in their list of New Testament writings, while itself claiming to be authored by First Clement. And in this line, we also have First Clement and Second Clement in Cambridge Additional Manuscript 1700, and the epistles on the virginity in 2 other manuscripts in their stead. At this point, I would conclude by getting back at the question of association, to make the point that the question of association, is crucial for the survival of the 2 Clementine letters in Syriac. Christopher Tackett, who edited Second Clement, suggested that it may be that Second Clement only survived because of this assumed connection with First Clement. I'm happy to push it further and argue that, irrespective of whether First and Second Clement were canonical to anybody, it seems very likely that the reason we have this Syriac witness at all is because, or has something to do with the fact that they were copied with the New Testament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. I shall unmute so that we can all applaud you and then demute for questions.
Thank you.
So, we already have that. Jan is clear, but by this point in week 9, we know what the system is for asking questions. But I will remind you, if you're new, that if you raise your hand in the participants window or write something in the chat window, we will be glad to invite you to ask questions. And the first is Jan Krantz. So Jan, over to you. I thought I'd pressed unmute. I have.
Yes, thank you, Dan. That's very, very interesting. I have just one remark to make, actually. If I'm not mistaken, the Syriac text with the Latin translation of this manuscript was first published by Wettstein in 1752 in his New Testament edition. So maybe you would like to, you know that already, or maybe you would like to consult that.
I did know that, and I have other examples in which you get, well, in manuscripts, you do have Apostolic Fathers copied with biblical text. That's not impossible. It's not so much the case, apart from Wettstein, to have them printed with the New Testament. That's more rare, but you have them sometimes printed in other collections. You get, I think, the Shepherd of Hermas in a collection of Apocrypha, one of the first ones. Please.
If you look at the 1751-52 edition, actually the part with the letters of Clement is very much apart from the rest of the edition. It is by a different printer, and it's just like some kind bound with the same volume. But Wettstein was very proud that he could. I think it's the Editio Princeps, so that he was the first to publish, especially Second Clement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Christina Kveidecker.
Thank you. Hello, Dan. Good to see you that way.
Good to see you, and then.
Thanks for your paper. I appreciate it. I was just wondering, can I ask you, should we rediscuss the canon of the New Testament, or should we encourage ecclesiastical communities, churches, and so to do so? Or do you think it's a discussion of the past where we can just re-access how they may have seen the canon or things like that?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, thank you. Thank you for the question. As far as I'm concerned, my interest is purely historical. I'd probably avoid pressing on anybody to rethink their own canon. I think I have a long way to go to understand how various canons work today in various communities, let alone in the past, even though I did delve into that for a while. I don't think what I discussed today has much to do with the canon anyway. I mean, I used the quotation from Lightfield because it's quite a strong position taken, and it's a good starting point to go in any other direction, really. But overall, my experience with this sort of text is that the ancient people were more relaxed about looking at other texts than whatever canon they would be working with if pressed.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's really because First Clement, I usually get that question then by students and they want to know. And so I was really curious to see you working with all these, how you approach it. So thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Super, thank you. Paul Foster, you're next.
Dan, thank you for a very, very interesting paper. I enjoyed that. I was just wondering if you have any reflections on the fact you have this Syriac manuscript of First and Second Clement, you know, after the first millennium. You're also getting maybe slightly earlier, but Syriac versions of pseudo-Clementine literature. Do you think there's any connection, or is there a wider interest in the Syriac church, in the figure of Clement in the 11th and 12th centuries? So you will know more about this than me. So I just find it interesting that you've got the manuscripts and an interest in the recognitions and homilies.
Thank you, Paul, and good to see you as well. And haven't seen you in a while. And well, this manuscript of the 12th century comes in a void. We don't know what precedes it. Presumably something did, unless we have the manuscript that the result of the person who imagined the embedding of First Clement and Second Clement in a liturgical, any liturgical program. And then we have earlier manuscripts that contain pseudo-Clementine literature. From what I remember, I think the proposal is that this translation, even though of the manuscript of the 12th century, it's the proposal is that it dates from the 7th century. The cataloger, Wright, who cataloged the Cambridge collection of Syriac manuscripts, even names a school where it might have come from. I don't know of any recent reevaluation of that.
Right.
But it's not impossible, of course. That's it's a terminus atquem, the manuscript. We don't know how early it got. We do have manuscripts of the 5th century with recognitions, and quite some things in between.
All right.
What to do with that, I don't know yet. Can we put too much weight on a document like the Apostolic Canons? Did those generate anything? Were they important in any way? Because it mentions, it's both written by Clement and mentions the two letters, presumably these two letters, as a part of the New Testament. I don't know. I just try to pick up the few data that we have and put them in some sort of image.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And you might have seen on chat, Kurt Nickham has noted that the Clementine letters are included in Arabic and Ethiopic canon lists beginning around the 12th century. I mean, I know, Dan, you said that you were going to restrict your investigation to continuous text manuscripts in lectionary apparatus, but it does seem as if there may be a trove of material in lectionaries which hasn't been adequately investigated, particularly if the assembly of the lectionary, as Georgi Parpolov argued at SBL, is later than is often held to be the case. I mean, I think, for example, of the presence of the Protevangelium of James in some Greek lectionaries as a reading, and the idea that there may be passages from non-canonical literature in the Menologion which haven't really been applied in a text critical way, but are awaiting a proper investigation of the lectionary. So that would be something to follow up.
It would be indeed. And thank you, Kurt, for this comment. What I presented today are first soundings. This is my first reflex to go at continuous text manuscripts, just to get an idea of how in Syriac Christianity did they bother or not to include other texts with it. The rest of the project should deal with virtually any trace of the Apostolic Fathers in Syriac literature. And that should include at some point, I think, lectionaries. But from what I know, and I'm not a specialist in that, that is a real mess.
Well,
liturgical manuscripts in Syriac, it's a real mess. But thank you.
Well, thank you for these first fruits of your new project. Congratulations indeed on the project, and we look forward to hearing more about it.